Good morning. I think people will start trickling in as we start. Welcome to this full day webinar focused on integrated sensing and communication, or ISAC. Today we are bringing you insights from 9 European 6G and SNS projects and 3 perspectives from leading standardization bodies. My name is Henk Wijmeers. I'm a professor at Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden, and I will be your host for today along with Dr. Sharif Saleh. This webinar was co-organized by the 9 participating SNS projects and coordinated by the European 6G flagship project Hexa-X-II. We encourage the attendees to actively participate by submitting their questions via the chat. Presenters will do their best to address these questions after each talk. However, to ensure that we stay on schedule, please note that some questions may not be answered live. We have an exciting and information-packed agenda ahead, featuring cutting-edge research and viewpoints on ISAC. Without further delay, let's begin with our first presentation, ISAC from the ETSI perspective by Alain Mourad from Interdigital. Alain, I will stop sharing and give you the floor.
Okay, thank you, Hank. Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen first. Hopefully, get it through. Okay. All right, so you should be able to see my screen. And if I need to swap between presenter mode, please let me know.
Yeah, you're not in presentation mode yet.
All right, okay.
Yes, perfect.
All right, perfect. All right, excellent. Okay, so again, good morning, everybody. And thank you, Hank, for inviting me to present the ETSI perspectives on ISAC. So I'm Alain Mourad. I'm a senior director at Interdigital, and I'm here also in the capacity of the chair of the industry specification group on ISAC at ETSI. So first, to ground all of us on what we mean by ISAC. So very briefly, so ISAC here is adding a radar capability into both the network and the user device. And the idea actually is to be able to use this capability to sense or detect or identify various objects. So such an identification, detection and identification actually can be used either to enhance network operations or services that are running on top of the network. So ISAC and pre-standards and standards forums. First, to start with the ITU IRMT 2030, which I think most of us are familiar with, you would appreciate that ISAC has been agreed as one of the 6 user scenarios in IRMT 2030, which is I'm showing in that green box on the right-hand side. But the story of ISAC in these pre-standard forums and standard forums doesn't stop at the ITUR accepting ISAC as a user scenario. 3GPP has already actually started an SA1 feasibility study on ISAC in the context of 5G Advanced back in 2022 with focus on use cases. Then in 2023, actually, we launched the ETSI ISAC ISG, which I'm going to be actually delving into next on my presentation. Then in the 3GPP run this year started a study item on ISAC channel modeling in the context of the release 19. And more recently, back in May this year, 3GPP hosted an IRMT 2030 workshop on key 6G drivers, and ISAC was highlighted as one of the key 6G drivers at that important workshop. And the next milestone from the pre-standard standard forum side on ISAC is the 3GPP 6G workshop coming up in March 2025, where there is an expectation that ISAC is likely to feature widely on the proposals from the different stakeholders of 3GPP on 6G. So this is just to set the scene as to where we see ISAC in the pre-standards and standards forums. And next, I'm going to be actually delving into the ETSI ISAC ISG that we started back in 2023. So what's the mission and scope of this ETSI ISAC ISG? So first of all, starting with the mission, as we clearly formulated here. So the idea here is to try to establish what we call technical foundations for ISAC development and standardization in 6G. Right? So really to take all the output of research that is happening in Europe through programs and projects like the ones represented at the workshop today, but also beyond Europe, also globally, all initiatives, research initiatives around ISAC. So try to build upon these research initiatives and streamline that research to pave the way for ISAC specification in standard bodies like 3GPP. So this is really the mission that we set for ourselves in this ETSI ISAC ISG. We then, around that mission, we agreed a scope of 5 key topics. The first topic is around the use cases and deployment scenarios. So the idea here is to develop a roadmap of 6G use cases and deployment scenarios enabled by ISAC. And clearly, as we are aware of the work of 3GPP in the 5G Advanced, in the SA1, where they come up with 32 use cases. So the idea here is to clearly build on that work and then, promote additional, more advanced use cases on the 6G roadmap. The second topic is around channel modeling for enabling all these target 6G ISAC use cases and deployments. And the idea here is also to validate these channel models that we're going to be coming up with some measurement campaigns, right? And the idea here is to try to fill the gaps of existing channel models, be it in 3GPP, in IEEE, or ITU, based on the findings of the ETSI ISAC ISG. The third topic that we agreed in the scope is around key performance indicators and evaluation methodology, so that we can actually, propose ways of evaluating, validating, and verifying, all solutions proposed, for enabling ISAC in 6G. Right. The fourth item in the scope, or topic in the scope, is really around the end-to-end architecture framework, so both core network side and RAN architecture side. And including also some end-to-end deployment considerations. And lastly, in the scope, we included a study of aspects pertaining to security, privacy, trustworthiness, and sustainability for ISAC. And on the sustainability front, this primarily from the energy consumption, energy efficiency standpoint. So this is formally our charter in terms of mission and agreed scope for this ETSI ISAC ISG. So our work items and timeline. So around that mission and work scope, we launched 4 work items at the beginning of this year. A first work item, so work item 1, with focus on use cases and deployment scenarios. The rapporteur on work item 1 is from Mitsubishi Electric. Work item 2 with focus on channel modeling, measurements, and evaluation methodology. The rapporteur on this work item 2 is ZTE. And work item 3 with focus on system and RAN architecture. And the rapporteur on this work item 3 is from Huawei. And work item 4 on the security, privacy, trustworthiness, and sustainability. And the rapporteur of work item 4 is from Apple. As you'll see on that timeline that I'm showing on the top, so we kicked off back in November last year, but effectively the work started in January this year. So we have had 3 plenary meetings so far. The last was a couple of weeks ago, plenary 003. And we are making a great progress, actually, especially regarding work item 1, as you'll see next. So we have the delivery, or the first, what we call a group report, 001, which is equivalent of a technical report in 3GPP terminology. So we are in good track to finalize this work, hopefully by end of this year, which is perfect timing, so that we can actually provide these outputs via different channels into that important 6G workshop from 3GPP in March 2025. So I'm going to actually get into the progress of all these work items in the next part of the presentation. So in terms of timeline, the ISG has got approval for a first 2 years release according to the ETSI framework. So we will be completing the first phase or the first release by end of by November next year, with some expectation for this work to continue into second phase. So who are the active members in the ISAC-IG? So presently we have got 91 affiliations. So these are ETSI members who are participating from different regions around the world, really. And of course, we continue to be advocating for more members, whether industry or universities or research institutes or small companies. So anyone who has got actually an interest into, the ISAC topic and bridging ISAC research into, if you like, standards through the ETSI framework of ISGs, we welcome you, and by all means, would love to have you joining us and contributing to the work. I'm not going to go into the list. I think you've got the list of companies and universities, and you would appreciate that we've got really a very large and wide coverage of all stakeholders from all over the world on the topic of ISAC. So in terms of progress, obviously, as we put an emphasis in the work plan to be ready with the 6G ISAC use cases in time for the 6G workshop of 3GPP in March next year. And naturally, we put significant effort in the ETSI ISAC-IG over the past 9 months on this work item 1. So as I say, the lion's share of contributions so far has been on the work item 1. And we've got actually 18 6G ISAC use cases that have already been approved by the ETSI ISAC-IG. And obviously, there are opportunities now for all these ETSI members who engaged in these activities around work item 1 to bring these use cases, 6G ISAC use cases, into the 3GPP SA1 study on 6G use cases that has just started. Naturally, we continue, as we kicked off work item 1, work item 2, and work item 3. So work item 2, especially, we made some progress here with focus on advanced concepts, really ahead of what's being discussed in the study item, release 19 study item at 3GPP Run 1 channel modeling. So here in this work item 2, so the idea for us is not to duplicate the work of 3GPP Run 1 on this channel modeling, but rather to be complementary and then addressing actually all these advanced concepts that 3GPP would take some time before actually being able to process and approve these. So this is what we set focus for us, and we have been really progressing pretty well on that. With advanced concepts such as advanced radar cross-section modeling, so advanced RCS, some micro-Doppler considerations, and also ISAC in the near field as well. Naturally, the work item 3, system and architecture, as it is really dependent upon this work item 1 and work item 2. So the work, was a little bit slow on purpose, but this work, as now we kind of got a clear idea upon the use cases, deployment scenarios. So the work now is really picking up with initial results that are expected in the next couple of quarters. Also ahead of the start of the work on ISAC in the 3GPP SA2. Also work item 4, so we had a delayed start on that important topic, and the work is already, picking up with a lot of interest on this work item 4. So in total, I think we counted above 200 technical contributions so far over the past 9 months from all, most of these industry players and universities and research institutes. And as I already mentioned, actually, as you can appreciate here on that histogram, so the lion's share really of the contributions has been around work item 1 on use cases, and then follows work item 2 and work item 3. Okay, so I mean, in principle, we cannot delve into really the detailed technical outcome at this stage because we haven't published the work yet of this work item 1. But just for the sake of this workshop and give some insights, so I elected to present what I call a teaser preview of the ISAC use cases that have been approved, discussed and approved in the ETSI ISAC ISG. So I'm not going to go through these on the left-hand side, but basically the summary here is that there are 18 use cases that really fall in 5 categories of use cases. The detection, localization, and tracking being an obvious category. Then environment reconstruction and imaging, second category, posture gesture recognition, health safety traffic monitoring, and enhanced network operations. Now, it's important to mention here that actually these 5 categories, might be familiar to those who have been engaged with the 3GPP SA1 study on 5G advanced for ISAC use cases, which is, I think they are around the same kind of categories, these 32 use cases. But it's important to highlight here that the use cases that were actually brought to the ETSI ISAC ISG and approved at the ETSI ISAC ISG, they all, presented advances to those baseline use cases that were captured in the 3GPP SA1. So what we refer to as the delta, and what we accepted in the ETSI ISAC ISG is always spelled out and emphasized with baseline what the SA1 did for the 5G advanced feasibility study on ISAC. And as I mentioned before, so there is expectation that some of these use cases that we already approved around ISAC and 6G that will be contributed by members of the ETSI ISAC ISG who are also members of the 3GPP and that study item on 6G use cases by the 3GPP SA1. So what's the road ahead for us in the ETSI ISAC ISG? So we will continue to execute upon that approved work plan for us in the phase 1. So as I said, so we are due to complete that phase 1 around November next year. And of course, we execute by keeping a close eye upon the progress made in 3GPP, but also in other research and standard forums, including ITU, IEEE, and others. We will be making available and promoting the phase 1 output group reports in time for the study of the start of the study items on 3GPP release 20. And we will soon actually start developing what we call the work plan for the phase 2. Which will take place in 2026, 2027, so that we account actually for the roadmap in 3GPP around 6G ISAC and also other standard bodies, and then position the phase 2 of the ETSI ISAC ISG in a way to be always ahead and complementary and supportive of the work that will be conducted in 3GPP and other standard bodies. So our next meeting, we have 2 online meetings coming up end of the month and another one in mid-November. And our next plenary meeting is in December, 3 days, 17 and 19 December, kindly hosted by Apple in Munich in Germany. And this is the contact information here. So me as a chair, and I'm also pleased, with Hank, the host of this workshop, being also our vice chair. And 2 additional vice chairs from Richard from Huawei and Ayman Najib from Apple. And you've got some links here in the presentation if you'd like actually to get more information upon what we do in this ETSI ISAC ISG. And I think that's it from my side. So happy to take any comments, questions, or any feedback.
Thank you, Alain. A very interesting presentation. So for the attendees, we do have the Q&A tool. The chat itself is disabled, but you can pose your questions through the Q&A and then they will appear to the speakers. So feel free to do that. While people are pondering their questions, maybe I can get started with a question. So the ISAC ISG is one of the many ISGs, right? So there's also one on race and maybe security and terahertz. So how do those interact? Because I guess ISAC could rely on race, could rely on terahertz. Can you clarify that?
No, absolutely. I think it's a great question, Hank. When we submit any ISG, right, any proposal for new ISG, the ISG proposal will have to account for what's already in there, whether it is at ETSI or in other, standard bodies, and appreciate, what kind of synergy or overlap there may be, right? Now, naturally, if we focus on ISGs, existing ISGs at ETSI, right, the motivation is to have as much synergy as possible, right? If I take, for example, the topic of terahertz, right? We were aware before we set up this ISAC ISG that there was this terahertz ISG, and of course, ISAC is a topic of interest for the terahertz group as well. So we tried actually then to focus in our own ISAC ISG on ISAC in, if you like, below 100 gigahertz, right? So that we are really complementary with what they do. So that's, if you like, when on the scoping side. But then once all these ISGs are up and running, there is a coordination that's happening, at ETSI between the leadership of all these ISGs and ensuring that the work is always, all ISGs are aware of the work of each other through either liaison statement or joint workshops and things like that. So, and in a short answer, all these ISGs where there are areas of overlap are being really coordinated, and they tackle, the topics in synergy and in a proper coordination.
Thank you, Alain.
Sure.
In the meantime, we have some questions from our chat. So there's a question from Ahmed about imaging. So he's asking, can you elaborate maybe on estimating material properties and how imaging in ISAC is different from traditional imaging, like radar or terahertz, or maybe what they do in the airport?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, I would be tempted actually to, we do have actually environment reconstruction kind of use cases, obviously, and I think imaging is part of it. But naturally, we need to go up in the frequencies to kind of have an appreciation of the imaging, if you like, use cases. And as I said, we try to kind of stay below the 100 gigahertz in our own ISAC ISG so far, so that we don't, duplicate the work on ISAC, with the terahertz ISG in a way. But certainly, imaging is a topic of interest that featured in the ISAC use cases that were brought by different companies.
So maybe I have a follow-up question, because people talk a lot about imaging. Do you foresee that a 6G use case would be to replace airport scanners? Because sometimes people talk about this, but I'm not sure if that's really what 6G is all about.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen actually any use case proposed to kind of replace those, nice, exciting scanners, at airports. To be honest with you, it's more like kind of localized kind of stuff. Our focus actually has been really to try to enable this radar capability or ISAC capability, if you like, with the cellular system. Right. So and obviously the cellular system, as you would appreciate, brings really the dimension of scale, right? Rather than being, focused on niche use case, like scanners and airports and similar. But what I'm really aware of actually regarding scanners kind of use cases in airports is, some use cases proposed on this at the terahertz ISG. Right, and naturally, because it's terahertz, it's short distance, it's short range, right? And I think the scanners already, if I'm not mistaken, they already operate at very high frequency, I believe. Yeah.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience. How is a 6G ISAC different from 5G ISAC? Although I guess in 5G there was no ISAC, but there was still positioning, and there was nothing preventing for the user device or a base station to sense the environment, even in the form of radar-like sensing. So what's really new in 6G?
Yeah, I think that's a great question indeed. Yeah. I mean, naturally, for those familiar with 3GPP, so 3GPP introduced that positioning framework, right, kind of recently in the context of 5G or 5G Advanced, right, release 17, 18. And that's great, actually, because for the first time, we got maybe some reference symbols dedicated for, positioning that were introduced anyway, right, in the 3GPP framework. So this is all good news. And the work in 5G Advanced around sensing is to assume what's already in there as a framework for positioning and actually try to use it for whichever use case that you may be able to enable with that existing framework. Of course, that framework may not be ideal, may not be optimal, and most likely it's not optimal, for the sake of all these use cases, 6G use cases of ISAC. But we can still, I think, use it, do some good work with it, and enable some use cases with it. And I think this is where the industry actually is focused on when it comes as to enabling ISAC in the context of 5G advanced. So they don't talk about, for example, supporting, the plethora of use cases of 6G ISAC. They are very selective as to what use cases they can support, but also they don't talk about any radical change that would break the backward compatibility in terms of coming up with new reference symbols or new waveforms or new baseband algorithms and so all this is actually what's left for 6G to do, because obviously with a new G, we are kind of we are not constrained by that backward compatibility that a given generation actually would impose upon us.
Thank you. More questions are rolling in. Next question is from Morteza. So I guess a lot of the work on the ISAC ISG is in the context of 6G using RF signals, but what about light? You can also do sensing and positioning with light, which is just also on the electromagnetic spectrum. How do you see the relation to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we already have that, that Li-Fi standard anyway, and I'm sure, they already identified sensing as a potential actually use case in there. But again, here when we talk about ISAC, we really put it in the context of cellular, right? So that's why, we put emphasis on the 3GPP. So we don't necessarily, if you like, go into, really very localized kind of, use cases anyway, right?
So going back to use cases, I suppose one of the use cases for sensing information, I don't know if it's covered as one of the use cases in ETSI, is the improvement of the communication system itself. Is this something that's listed among these use cases? Is this an important use case or just one of the many, many use cases?
No, absolutely. And that's, I think, a great question, Hank. As you can see, actually, in the categories, in the 5 categories, the 5th category is really on enhanced network operations, right? And I was really pleased, actually, to see this, use cases here championed by, operators. Like, I think for example, BT, British Telecom, and Orange, right? So definitely telcos, they do appreciate that they can actually make a good use of sensing for their own, network performance enhancement. Definitely. So it isn't just about the end user application or service. It's also about themselves, the network itself. Indeed. Yeah.
Thank you. There was another question, but maybe it's a rather technical question about the effect of multipath propagation, how it affects indoor localization. I don't know if you want to comment on that. Otherwise, we can save it for the chat.
Yeah, multipath propagation. Would you mind repeating the question, Hank?
The question is, how does multipath propagation affect the accuracy of indoor localization?
Well, I think that's interesting. I mean, obviously, again, with my limited insight into this, I think the more multipath, the better in terms of supporting. I mean, the more diversity you get, right? Ideally, we would like to have some maybe line of sight, which may not be available to us. So there should be mechanisms in a way to kind of, leverage that multipath in a way to, improve that accuracy for localization. I'm pitching here in the presence of Hank, the champion of localization. So please chime in on that, Hank, if you'd like.
Oh, no, but I agree. I mean, multipath is a major limiting factor. And actually, I think it relates nicely to the next question from Herman Blackie, who's asking, is there any value in studying ISAC in the context of FR1 bands for detecting, localization, tracking? Because he says that FR2 sensing seems the better option. I think this is a complicated question with many aspects involved, but what is your take?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, when we set the scope, we did not, we tried to avoid that above 100 gigahertz, but clearly, all use cases that were actually presented to us, they do actually include FR1, FR2, but also FR3, right? So it isn't just about, either FR1 or FR2. It's FR1, FR2, but also FR3. And it isn't just, again, when we talk about ISAC, it's not just about localization. right? So there are definitely, use cases that would actually make a good use of, some sensing capability with FR1 that gives you maybe some wide coverage, some coarse appreciation of an environment that is actually complemented in duality with additional sensing capability with higher frequencies, be it FR2 or FR3.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, I'm answering some questions in the meantime.
Okay.
Another maybe more high-level question. So if people want to join the ETSI ISAC ISG, so they can just go to the ETSI website and create an account and they're part of it, or there's something more involved?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if you're an ETSI member, right, you don't need to sign anything actually. Just shoot me an email or shoot Hank an email or the technical officer. I think you've got the detail here in my presentation. So our technical officer is Jon Kraus. Sorry if I'm spelling it not right. So shoot any of these contacts information an email, and then we will guide you how to do it. And if you're not an ETSI member, it's really also shoot us an email. We'll let you know how you can actually become an ETSI member and then join the ISAC ISG.
Thank you, Alain. I think we're close to the end of this first presentation.